This is my emergency notes in case my phone dies. So, welcome. I am Jessica Bennett. I am gender editor at the New York Times, and we are thrilled to welcome you to a very serious subject, but what is going to be a very fun debate. So, we are here at a conference that is focused on inclusion, but there is one thing we have not spent a lot of time talking about: white men. That is for a reason. The white man gets kind of a lot of attention already, and yet his presence in the halls of power, in the halls of leadership, cannot be overstated. So tonight, we are going to be debating his role in advancing inclusion. How far should we go to try to bring him in, to dissuade his tendency to cling to the status quo? Perhaps the white man, as my colleague Paul Krugman put it in a recent column, is angry for a reason, and we should try to understand harder his plight. Or should we? Tonight's debate begins with the following premise: the key to inclusion is not actually women and other minority groups, but white male privilege. Some questions we'll be getting at: do diversity efforts fall short of addressing the persistent structures and entrenched status of these men? Could better engaging this group actually prove fruitful? Or in contrast, is putting power in the hands of women and underrepresented groups actually the most reliable way to drive inclusion at pace? So basically, does white male privilege need to be dismantled or put toward a greater cause? The point of this debate is to drive a lively discussion of ideas, all of which you can engage on Twitter about using the hashtag WFGM19 and NYTdebate. So, a few words about format. I have never done one of these Oxford-style debates before. There are a lot of rules. I will remind you as we go. 1, the way this works is the teams will alternate speakers, and each speaker will have 3.5 minutes for opening comments. You do not have to use that whole time. 2, I will call the speakers up in pairs, one for the for team, one for the against. I will warn you when you have 30 seconds left, and if you go over, I will interrupt you, but in a super nice way, because I don't want to be penalized for being a woman interrupting. After we have heard from each debater, our jury, will be called up to respond. Judges, where I'm looking at you in the front row, judges, remember, you are not here to decide who the winner is, just to make your comments. And after our judges speak, each team will have a couple of minutes to regroup, and then finally they get 1 minute and 30 seconds for rebuttal. And then we turn it all to you. Audience gets to clap and shout and scream and make what other kind of noise you would like to choose your winner. So in some ways, this is actually like not about the debaters, but more about how loud you can be. Okay, teams, I'd like to introduce you. You are not necessarily sitting in the order I'm going to read your bios, so please wave to the crowd as I give your intro. Paul Rector. Hi, Paul. VP and General Manager of Global Accounts at Lenovo, the world's largest personal computing company. Fun fact, we asked everyone to give a fun fact about themselves. Some of their staffs sent them, so Paul has no idea what I'm about to say. Don't worry, Paul, it's not bad. Paul was almost a professional football player. Soccer, for those Americans in the audience. He was offered a slot in a club in England at age 18, but chose to go to college instead. Stephen Frost. Founder and president of FrostIncluded, which works with individuals, teams, and organizations to embed inclusive leadership in their decision-making. Fun fact, Stephen, I think, did send this one. Stephen is a keen cyclist who takes his bicycle all over the world with him, and his lifetime ambition is to visit every country. He has done 113, is that right? Countries so far. Shouts to those 113 countries. Karima Sylvant. Chief HR Officer at AXA. Fun fact, Karima currently has on her bedside table and is reading a book called Why We Dream, which she highly recommends. It's about the power of dreams and sleeping. We will not be sleeping during this debate. Okay, on the against team, hi guys. We have Heather McGhee, President Emeritus at the think tank Demos, and soon to be author of a book about the costs of racism to us all. Fun fact, you don't have a microphone, but I wanted you to tell us more about this. We'll come back to that. But she and her brother once did a piece of performance art at the Guggenheim Museum. I'm very curious what that performance art was, and maybe when you come up, you can we won't count it against you in your time. You just tell us very quickly. Margaret Johnston Clark, Head of Global Diversity and Inclusion at L'Oreal. She actually always pictured herself doing the Peace Corps and working for an international NGO, but ended up in the beauty business. Finally, Fabrice Houdart from the Office for the High Commission of Human Rights at the UN. Fun fact, Fabrice initially wanted to work in the perfume industry, and I happen to know that he today was going to take a nap at his parents' house here in Paris and got locked out, but luckily he was in this chic suit that he's still wearing. Okay, less of me, more of you. I would like to begin our first two debaters to the stage. You will each stand at one of these podiums. There are 2 mics here, and this is the for group. Now, we've talked so much that probably everyone has forgotten actually what the prompt is. So let me just remind you, the key to inclusion is not women and other minorities, but white male privilege. Okay, for team, please come up. I'll awkwardly stand behind you. Yes, 1 for and 1 against. So we're gonna start with for. And when you conclude, we will go to against.
Okay. We on? Bonsoir tout le monde. Hello, everybody. So you might have noticed that I'm a white guy. And I misread the briefing. I couldn't read the French, and maybe I'm on the wrong team. But actually, I'm arguing for. I'm arguing that the key to inclusion is less about women and other minorities, more about white male privilege. So, okay, I'm gay, I'm from a poor background, so there's a couple of ticks, but I'm basically doing okay, right? So, am I on the right team? Well, I think I am, because this is a question of adaptation. And what do I mean by adaptation? Well, what I mean is that if you are a minority, you've been adapting your whole life. It's how you survive. Women acting male, gays acting straight, black acting white. You adapt to fit in, you adapt to survive. So minorities are pretty good at adapting. Folks in the dominant group, white men, for example, are not so good at adapting. And if you look out the window today, we kind of all need to adapt. The world's in an interesting place, and adaptation, organizational agility, change is the name of the game. And so while some of us have to adapt, others may choose to adapt, all of us need to adapt. And so I'm interested in how we help white guys adapt. Men need help. Men are diverse. And some of them need help because it's about developing empathy, or about understanding stereotype threat, being trapped by notions of masculinity, even toxic masculinity. And some guys need help. And it might seem counterintuitive to be empathetic to people who appear to need it the least. But other guys, of course, need challenge. Other guys aren't going to give up power unless they have to. Often they want to stay in power because if they lose power, it might mean, for example, they get indicted. So all of us need to be included, all of us need to adapt. And there is good news on the horizon. People are adapting, men are adapting, and the future needs that adaptation. Let me give you an example. The word privilege might scare a lot of people, mainly white men. But the words white and men also scare a lot of people, not only as white men. But the meaning's real. I have the privilege of teaching the MBAs at various universities around the world, and I get them to have an arm wrestle for 1 minute. Bear with me. 90% of the class, predominantly men, score 0 points. They are aching and sweating and laughing, and they score 0 points. 10% of the class, predominantly women, score 30 or 40 points. How? They simply cooperate, right? That actually the goal is to score as many points as you can, not to kill the other person.
But check.
We're primed to zero-sum games, and we need to enlarge the pie. So I look forward to men scoring more points, women scoring more points, all of us scoring more points, and challenging white male privilege. Thanks a lot.
Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. That was Frederick Douglass, United States self-emancipated slave and abolitionist in 1857. The status quo, we have had 30+ years of diversity and inclusion efforts, is still the same, roughly. It's not changing fast enough. So we have to ask ourselves, how is it that in a globalized economy, the global minority is still ruling? Women are still underrepresented at every level in corporate America, even though they have been earning more college degrees than men for almost 30 years now. As of 2018, there were only 3 black CEOs at the Fortune 500 companies. In 2018, there were more men named James in the Fortune 500 chief executive positions than all women put together. The richest 100 people on the globe, all billionaires, count just 10 women and just 1 person of color. Why is this? Because the rules for success were made by white men and for white men. The way companies recruit and market, reward and promote allow a glide path for those who reflect their life experiences and a rocky climb for everyone else. Now, I'm not saying that we can't succeed, look at this room, but it is to say that in some ways, I agree with Stephen, we've had to conform to a model that is not native to our lives. In order to do so for women, we've had to find a way to have a wife at home, whether it's our husband or someone else's wife. If we are people of color, we've had to be educated with white people and learn to speak like them. If we're queer, we've usually had to cover that identity in one setting or another. In-group bias is real. Decades of research has shown it and proven it. Men are more likely to see men as natural managers, and the average white person in a white majority setting holds biases against people of color that include, take your pick. We are more dangerous, lazy, untrustworthy, less intelligent, less creative. The list goes on. LGBTQ and gender non-conforming individuals, people with disabilities, and indigenous people suffer from a lack of visibility and even basic understanding of their needs. Now, we know the business case for diversity, right? I could cite statistic after statistic, but it all boils down to this. When you're searching for clients and customers in a globalized economy, why would you want the only perspective in leadership to be that of the global minority? There's no good answer. That's because the concentration of wealth and power is not rational, it's not efficient, it's not something that we can convince our way out of. It's simply unfair. So unless you believe that the majority of the ingenuity, the innovation, the smarts, and the talent in this globe are actually concentrated in the minority of the global population, you'll have to agree that it's time to force a rebalance of power, to force that rebalance of power, whether the dominant group likes it or not.
Thank you both. Also, very impressed by your time management. Neither of you went over by a second, and you used your whole time. Who is next?
Okay, so good afternoon. Thanks for having me here today. And I got to warn you, I'm kind of a data freak. So I want to start off with some numbers to kind of frame the conversation, or at least the argument that I have. And you've probably heard these through the week here, but the numbers I want you to think about are 10, 23, and 80. Okay, so the first one, 10, is the improvement in profit that organizations get when they actually have a very diverse leadership team, especially senior leadership. 10%. 23, that's how much better women do or girls do in school than boys do. And you can go through the entire educational system. It's by age, by curriculum, whatever it is, girls outdo boys consistently. And if you talk to anybody in the Fortune 500, the number one thing that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis and they worry about every day currently is talent. So talent is, how do you find it, how do you attract it, and then how do you retain it? So there's three different things to that. So if you've got a talent pool out there that is obviously one of the best out there, you would think that you would want to bring them into the equation. So the other stat is 80. 80% of leaders in the Fortune 500 space are white male. So there's obviously this big disconnect between the talent pool, the financial results, and what we're actually doing from an organizational structure. So how do we get over that? I don't think, you can do it three ways is the way I look at it, or my experience is. You can either ignore it, you can burn it down, or you can work and use it to your advantage. So I advocate that you use it to your advantage. These men are there, and most men actually want to make this work. They're not against it. They're not afraid of it. They don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to find the talent. They don't know what they're actually doing wrong in certain cases. So if you think about men, they're relatively simple creatures, okay? You need to make it about men. As long as it's about them, and you have what's in it for them, and they understand that, they will grab onto this like there's no tomorrow. And I think most of you in the room know that. My wife tells me that all the time. It's all about me. So, at least for my generation, and maybe this is an American thing, but I think it's worldwide, men are taught from an early age that winning is almost everything. If you win, you're successful. In the business world, to win and be successful, you have to perform. You have to actually deliver results for the corporation. So as soon as they find out and realize that these things are going to happen, if they get better talent by doing diversity inclusion, if they get better profit margins, they're going to glam onto it because it's going to make them more successful in the workplace. There's one other thing that I want to talk about. This is all data, and I said I'm a data guy, but there is some personal things in here that I think we forget about. So I may not be around a lot of women leaders, although I'm lucky at Lenovo where there are a lot. But I have 3 daughters at home, grown daughters. They're in the workforce. They're very successful. But they come to me and they talk to me about, I got this problem at work, I'm harassed, or I don't know how to get through some kind of exclusion, and I don't necessarily know how to answer their questions. So I'm here to learn, but I will tell you that men, for the most part, they do want to learn and they do want to help this, and if you get all these men behind it, I think it'll be way more powerful, and then you're not excluding anybody. Thank you.
Good evening. So I'm a civil servant, so I'm a little bit lazy, and I could not be bothered to build an argument or get data. And on top of this, as was pointed out to you, I tried to take a nap at my parents' and lock myself out. So there was no nap today. So you are going to get what you are going to get, which is I'm going to tell you a personal anecdote. I worked at the World Bank for 14 years because I couldn't get a job at L'Oréal. In the beauty industry, and toward the end of my time in 2014 there, I was at a dinner party, and I was seated next to Caroline Anstey, who was then the managing director of the World Bank. She had been there for 4 years, so she was a very important woman. She was basically the number 2 at the World Bank. And we spoke, and we spoke about my favorite topic, which is lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans people. And I said to her, when I joined the World Bank, for a very long time, in those myriad of review meetings, because that's what we do at the World Bank, we do review meetings. In all of those review meetings, when my time would come to speak, I would blush and I would sweat. And when I say sweat, I would sweat buckets. Because I had integrated the fact that I was an inferior species to the white, tall, straight guy in the room. And how could I not? Because my parents, my school, and my priest had been telling me for my entire childhood, from the age of probably 5 to the age of 22 when I left France to go come out in the US, and I was very good at it, so I stayed. You know, I was told this entire time that I was worthless. And, you know, I am one of those men that believe that sexual orientation is something, you know, very early on. And I have a good argument to prove it, which is that when my mom would receive the La Redoute catalog, I would go directly to the male underwear section. But I knew that nobody should know, because I knew I had integrated what society had told me, that it was shameless. So I said, you know, all that shame kind of came out, you know, left me when I finally came out, and I was proud about who I was. And you know what she said to me? She turned to me and she said, "You described exactly what it is to be a woman at the World Bank." And I was baffled, because I had no idea that other minorities had that same feeling. And that's what minorities experience, is that, you know, ingrained imposter syndrome, that we are worthless, that we are less worthy than the dominating group in the company, in society, at school, in academic settings. And so what we need to do is not to take the power away from the straight white guy in the room. What we need to do is to constantly, as company, as society, reiterate the fact that, you know, people of color, LGBTI people, people with disability, religious minorities, women are welcome, and that their voice matters. And I think this is a debt that society has to us. It has to repay the damage it does to us in childhood. And I think that this is what we have to do: empower minorities at the boardroom, in the classroom, and in every setting in society. So thank you very much.
Thank you both. Our final debaters, please come up.
So, have you noticed I'm a woman, I'm black, and I have not been forced to be in the white male group. I think Stephen said earlier that when you are in a minority, you somehow learn to adapt, and I do agree with that. And sometimes you get frustrated, you get angry, you think the pace of progress is slow. But nevertheless, I have developed some convictions. And there is one conviction, which is that there is no progress in the history of mankind which involved the word inclusion. We've started to exclude the other. And so with that, I do believe that we have no other choice than bringing the white males with us. It requires a lot of time to listen, to explain. It requires to shake it up sometimes, because it's very frustrating to see only 25% of men in this room. But it has a cost not to do it, because leaving men aside, we know what it means, because we have spent years discussing about the impact of not having women in the workplace. It's the same. Loss of productivity, frustrations, cynicism. So we need the white male with us. And we know they are the ones also deciding today, because most of the CEO roles are with white males. So we need to bring more of them with us. This conviction is about saying also that inclusion drives inclusion. You don't include with starting with excluding. And also it's about saying that I know no woman who wants to succeed at the cost of man. And I can tell you that as HR, I have spent many hours listening to men and women in their ambition, their aspirations of careers, their frustrations. And I know no woman who wants to win at the cost of men. Everyone wants to succeed, being legitimate, being recognized, and just being recognized as a professional in his career. But no one wants to win at the cost of men, and women have peers, colleagues, kids, so no one wants parity and inclusion to succeed at the cost of man.
Good evening to all. So this is really, really intimidating to be the 6th debater after all these amazing debates. So I'm going to disagree with Karima, but hopefully explain in very layman terms what one of the keys to inclusion is finding the solutions to empowering women and other minorities. So to do so, one of the first things we need to do is we really need to make sure that women and other minorities feel comfortable to speak up and to voice their opinion, so that would enable them to create a new form of leadership. So one of the things that's required to do so is to create a safe space, an inclusive workplace that would enable disclosure and speaking up. One of the things that we've seen is that companies have done tremendous, small, big, public, private, have tested over the years, but we do have to admit that when there are quotas, for instance, if I were to quote the French government in 2011 with the Copé-Zimmermann expecting company boards to have at least 40% of women on their boards, companies like ours at L'Oréal, we went from 21% of women in 2010 to 54% in 2019. So that, even though there was a great will and a great decision to have more acceptance and a sense of belonging, those legislations definitely helped, were definitely a tipping point. In terms of awareness, obviously, not everyone is expected, men or other, or women and minorities, to understand one another. So one of the key elements is making sure that we have the proper trainings, the proper awareness workshops, and so that we will all be able to speak the same language, understand one another, respect one another, obviously, and this means deploying at different levels the right tools. And finally, companies and organizations who have tested things, the idea is also to be creative. For instance, if I were to take the parental leave, which is a big debate in many countries, including in France, we see that more and more time given to sharing time out of the office, given by the office, to spend time at home, sharing chores, taking care of a child or more or many children, has a real effect on the work-life balance and on the work. So for instance, again, a last quick example, in 2013, when L'Oréal decided to promote, for instance, a maternity leave, a paid leave across the countries for women, we decided to deploy that a few years later for parents and co-parents. And we're right now measuring that impact. So thank you very much.
Debaters, thank you. Incredible work. Now we are going to invite up our esteemed jury. There are 3 of you and 2 mics, but I'm sure you'll figure it out. I will introduce you as you come up. Victoria Budson, Executive Director of the Women and Public Policy Program at Harvard's Kennedy School. In her role there, she chairs a training program called From Harvard Square to the Oval Office that prepares women to run for office. Welcome. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's great. Matt Krenz, you are a last-minute addition. Thank you for joining us here. Managing Director and Senior Partner of Diversity and Inclusion at the Boston Consulting Group. And Leah Daughtry, President and CEO of On These Things, a strategic planning and project management firm. She is also the co-convener of Power Rising, which brings together Black women and girls to leverage their power. You each have 2.5 minutes, which you'll see counted down here, and good luck.
Well, first of all of our debaters did a spectacular job, and our role is to give some comments and perhaps a challenge to them. And I wanted to say that each of you raised very key points. Paul did an incredible job talking about how important it is for the hiring, retention, and promotion strategies, and also that if we can just tell men what's in it for them, they'll be with us, which I think resonated. Stephen Frost talked about adaptability, which is going to be critical, regardless of which side one is on. Karima did a spectacular job in helping us really envision how we can see the future and what will be needed, and we can't create inclusion through exclusion. Margaret did a wonderful job talking about safe workspaces, and I need to give a big shout out that she talked about the double shift and that sharing at home, which is a much neglected issue in most of these conferences and events. I could not have been more appreciative of the wonderful role of both humor and talking about the imposter syndrome and how interesting it is that the majority of all of us experience this feeling of occlusion and being eclipsed when we're in meetings, and then what it's like to find out that most people around the table are feeling that way. And completely spectacular to talk about power. And I really thought that the ability for us to think about power and force with Heather's comments was quite a stunning way to open, and brings me in part to how we close. And I'm wrapping that along with Fabrice's humor as well. Now, all of these different pieces, which I've drawn out from the very important discussion, all lead to transformational leadership. And I challenge our two teams to think about, what does transformational leadership look like at this time period, whether it is that we move forward without including men and white male privilege at the core, or whether we move in inclusively, as Karima talked about, bringing white men fully into this journey. But without transformational leadership, we won't arrive. Martin Luther King, when he led the civil rights movement in the United States, said, "I have a dream." He didn't say, "I have a complaint." And by saying, "I have a dream," he created an opportunity for each and every person to see themselves, if they chose, within that dream. And I think that is our work for the future. Thank you.
So finding out I was doing this 2 hours ago, and then finding out actually what I was doing about 20 minutes ago, I'm going to try to spice up the debate maybe a little bit. I thought you all brought some wonderful points, but when you have your minute and a half rebuttal, I'm going to pose a question, some of your debates, to each of you to try to respond. Heather, I thought your point around power doesn't give up without challenge, very compelling. And I think we've seen that in many places, the data showed that on our boards, the numbers didn't change for decades until countries and places started requiring. And even in California, that passed recently, to put a woman on a board, how many companies didn't actually have women on boards? So my question to the team that was arguing about why this has to be embracing of white male privilege is, how do you respond to the fact that no change happens without direct challenge to power? Now, on the other side, I thought there were also some very, very good points. In work I do with clients, one of my most recent ones, we had a 2-hour debate in their executive committee about whether affiliation groups, ERGs, were actually embracing of diversity or actually defining exclusion and not building inclusion. And I thought the point that you made, Karima, around you don't start inclusion by leading with exclusion to be very powerful. And if you're leading the opposition, yes, change doesn't come without challenge to power. But if you don't bring power along, how do you respond to that in terms of how will we ever really get change without completely fragmenting? Thank you.
Good afternoon. I want to join. Okay, y'all forgot I'm from the Talkback Church. Good afternoon. All right, we want to first echo my colleagues. Everybody did a really great job and made wonderful points. The notes that I would offer, to get right to the heart of the matter, for the against group, the statement is the key to inclusion is not women and other minorities, but white male privilege. So then the key is women and other minorities making changes or taking a place at the table. And that assumes a level playing field exists to even engage in the discussion. And we know that even among women, there is no level playing field without regard to race, sexual orientation, and gender identity. So your position assumes that women and minorities are all rowing in the same direction. And those, I think, are facts, not in evidence. Secondly, I would press you a bit on how you force women and minorities to take seats at the table when they have not had the tools to do so. And doesn't that put the burden on those who least need another burden? And it makes it their responsibility to fix a problem that they did not create. On the other side, I want to start with what he said, don't start inclusion by leading with exclusion. Well, we're already there. So it's not a matter of starting, it seems to me, it's a matter of how we correct the idea we have now that is we're already in exclusion, so how do we reverse that? And then your side also said no one wants to succeed at the cost of someone else losing. And I would argue that point. Because
in 50 seconds or less, please.
That seems to reinforce the notion that of the current cultural context of winners and losers, and I don't know that that's really what we're advocating. And lastly, adaptation assumes that the standards to which we are adapting is correct in the first place. And I would argue whether that is right. There's a thing on a meme that says equal rights for me does not mean less rights for you. It's not pie.
Judges, thank you so much. Okay, so we want to give our teams a minute to confer, and while that is happening, we are going to distract you with a lovely video brought to you by the New York Times. Okay. Final round. This is the rebuttal period. Each team can select one person, or you can all come up if you want, but one of you can speak to give a 1.5-minute rebuttal to what the judges have said. When you are finished, you will sit back down and we will begin our vote. 4 team.
Okay. 4. Transformational leadership. Challenging power. The burden should be on the majority with the power, not the minorities that have less power. Therefore, whilst I loved listening to the other team, you kind of missed the point. You see, Heather, I loved your chat about power, but it's about inclusion, not just diversity. I love diversity, but it's inclusion that we need. Fabrice, as a gay guy, you should know better. Okay, we're gay brothers, but we got male privilege, right? And Margaret loved it, would love some products from L'Oreal as well afterwards, if you remember. But fundamentally, the things you're talking about require men to share. And so when we discussed in our team about this, fundamentally, we need to include, but also challenge white male privilege, because that's where the power lies. If we have 0 plus 0, we get 0. If we have 1 plus 1, we can potentially get more than 2. Remember the arm wrestle. We know that from basic market economics, we can create more than the sum of the parts. But that means that we need to include men, not exclude them.
Why don't you stay? Please. Oh, okay. 4 team, I think you gotta stand. You gotta stand as well.
So we are modeling a new kind of leadership. Stephen, you said men need help. And I agree, as having led an organizational transformation process around equity, we focused a lot on the white men. Training them, helping them recognize blah, 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 blah. You end up giving men who are already resource rich more and more resources and assistance. Karima, you said we can't get to inclusion with exclusion. That's beautiful. And also wrong. Because we are modeling, I think that the rules were set by white men for their own benefit. And if by, in the words of Frederick Douglass, words or blows, we get to a place where there are enough women and people of color and other minorities in leadership, we will model a new way of doing business. I look forward to my son, who is 1 year old, being in that new paradigm, but we are going to be the ones to show the way there. And then finally, Paul, you said men don't know it's in their economic interest, that they'll do better when we are more at the table, that will be good for business. They know. Men know that we are talented, innovative, creative, adaptable. If they didn't know, they wouldn't have worked so hard to hold us back. Thank you.
Look at great sportsmanship. Okay, please stay. I would like you all to stay on the stage, and I would like to invite Sophie up here with me because she has a lot of experience judging clapping. So first of all, I want to take speaking tips from all of you. You did an amazing job. And now, I'll see you. Thank you. And now we're going to turn it all over to you. So first, let's repeat one more time. The key to inclusion is not women and other minority groups, but white male privilege. 4 team.
I think we'll need a win.
Okay. Against.
Well, I'm glad I had to put my skills to work. It's really
I think we have a pretty clear winner. But I have to tell you that when the revolution comes, you are all getting a free pass. One more round of applause for both of our teams.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And a huge round of applause to Jessica Bennett for her skillful moderating. Thank you so much to all of you.